And the way that we do that is to click a new layer here. Let's actually pull that right up to the top. Now, it tries to add 4 frames, and I don't want all 4 frames to hold this action. What I want is just 1 frame. So I'm going to insert a keyframe, frame 2, and what that means is because there's a keyframe only on this first frame of our actions layer, the action will only be applied here to this first keyframe here. Call my layer actions. Click on that first keyframe in the actions layer. Now I have the frame in this actions layer selected, and instead of like what we did with the button where we selected the button and we added the action directly to the button, this time we're going to add it directly to the frame. So I just have this frame selected here, and I go to my actions pop-up, and I simply type in stop, parentheses, parentheses, semicolon, stop. And what this piece of code says is that we have entered into frame 1, and what it's going to do is stop. The next action is that we have a button here, and when it clicks, it's going to go to frame number 2, which is the action we put there. So let's test and see if that actually occurs. Real quick, we'll hit save. And the way we test our movie is to go up to Control and Test Movie. Notice that it did stop on frame 1 since we're still here in this screen. And when I click on this button, it's red when it's in the normal state. When I'm rolled over, it turns orange, which is that little bit of interactivity for the button we added. And when I click it, it goes to frame number 2. Now frame 2 is white right now, so we're not getting anything. But the actions for that first screen of landing on the stop, or landing on the welcome page, stopping on the welcome page, which is the action we added to this this first layer, and then moving to frame 2, which is the action that we added to this button here. So let's move on to our first question in frame 2. So let's jump into frame number 2, where we will add the text and the objects for the first question in our quiz. So I take my timeline and I just move it to question number 2. If we look in our layers, the only thing that I actually have in question number 2 right now is that background outline. So I have that on my stage, and now I can populate it with some other elements. The first thing I'm going to do, I'll just add a keyframe right here on the text layer in the second frame by going to Insert, Keyframe, and it threw in the text from the previous layer. I'll edit that up using the text tool, and I'll call this question 1. This text's a little big. I'm going to open the Properties window. Once again, I'll take that down to about, let's say 35. I'll click on my arrow tool, and now I can just nudge that up there. I can do that either with the arrow keys like I'm doing now, just 1 pixel at a time, or I can drag it with my arrow key. So that's one text object. We have a science question here, and I have an image that I'm going to go to File, Import to Library, and I look in the folder that I started with, and I created a little folder. It's called Images, and I have a molecule JPEG that I'm going to open, and it just drops that right there into my library. And I'm going to pull this image right over. Actually, hold on. I'll create a new layer for images. Images. Now I only want it to be present on this second frame, so I'll insert a keyframe on these. There we go. Now I have a keyframe only on number 2. I have a keyframe on 1 and a keyframe on 3. That means what happens in the keyframe on the number 2 here will only occur in that second keyframe for the frame number 2, which is my question here. I'm going to grab it and just drag it from the library right onto the stage. And there it is. There's my molecule. Now let's add some text, which will be the question. I'll put that in my text layer, so I'll click that keyframe. Now I already have a text object here that says question number 1, but I can put some more objects on this layer. I'll click my text tool, and I'll just click right below it. There we go. Now I have a text file here that's already got my question, so I can copy it. Oops. I'm just going to paste that right in. And I'll shrink my text down a bit so it looks like it fits nicely on the page. And I'll use my arrow tool, and to just select this and move it right over. Use my arrow keys to kind of sync it right up. Good. Now this question is going to be a multiple choice, and the way we're going to do this is to have 3 options and then 3 buttons, so that when the user clicks one of the buttons, then they'll get an answer whether it's a correct or incorrect. Let's give them their 3 choices. That's some more text, so I'll open up that text file. Here's the first choice. I'll click on my text tool. Oh, there it is, it's already open. And I'll just paste that right into my text area. Shrink that down to, there we go. There's the first. Grab my text tool, do the same thing. Click the arrow tool, kind of center this. I can click on these individual text boxes and kind of move them around as I see fit. Let's grab the third one, ethanol. Now I can adjust the color and the font size for each of these so that I can get my elements to fit on the page. But let's say these are the 3 options that the user has to choose from. Now the next step is to create 3 buttons, one for each of these choices, and then we'll apply some actions to those 3 buttons. Now's a good time to jump up and click Save. So to create a button, we go to Insert New Symbol, and it's going to be a button, and I will call this 1, and that will be 1 of 3. Once again, it jumps me straight into the editor for that button. I'm going to click black with a gray fill and choose my oval tool and just create a small circle here. Now that's on the first layer. I'll click this last one here and insert, a frame. So I have this background now for all of the states of my button. Insert a new layer and click in this frame here. And I'm going to add some text. I'll make the text a nice dark red. And I'll put it right in here, and I'm just going to add a number 1. but I do want this 1 to basically fill my circle, so I'll size this up. That looks good. Oops. You can always click undo if you accidentally bump something. Now I'm going to click on my first frame here, and what that does is it selects all of the objects in my frame, and the only object I have is that number. So now it's selected. I can use my move tool and just with my arrows center that number 1. So now I have a button with text and a background, and I can click back to my stage, and on the buttons layer I will insert a keyframe. Now when I do that, it tries to take what was from the last frame and bring it over to this frame. I can ignore that just by clicking on my button, hitting delete, and that clears the keyframe. You can see the blank keyframe there. And I'll click in that frame, and now from my library I can pull that button right over and just drop it below my first selection. So when someone clicks number 1, it means this is their choice for what the molecular structure is. Now I could go in and repeat all of the steps for creating a button, but since I'm going to create another button that says 2 and another button that says 3, a fast way to do that is just to click on my 1 button here, right click on it, and select duplicate. And when I do that, I can give it a name. I'm going to call this one 2. And for number 2, now I'm going to double click on this in the library. So select the text tool, and I can click right on my number 1 here. I will delete number 1 and add number 2. And I think that'll do it for my number 2 button. I'll go back to my stage. I have the buttons frame selected, and now I can pull my number 2 button right out here to the stage. I can do some fine tuning with my arrow by clicking on it and waiting until it has the blue outline and then moving the object up and down. And I'll make a third button by right clicking over here on number 2 in my library, saying duplicate, and this one of course will be number 3. I'll give it a name and click OK. So when I click on number 3 in the library, it opens it in the editor. I can click on my text tool, select the number 2, and replace it with the number 3. So I can quickly reuse buttons just by editing text once I have a style and a feel. I can click on scene 1, go back to my stage. My buttons frame is selected, so I'll just grab this number 3 and pull that right out here. Click Save.